I am so glad that I watched this show. The moment I realized that I really liked it was when I noticed I could not stop thinking about it. Flawless? No. Entertaining? Very much so. Blue Eye Samurai came out a few months ago, and I am very late to the party. When it was released, I didn't really hear a lot about it, good or bad. It just happened and went. It was never really heavy on my radar. That, and it's a Netflix production. It wasn't until I saw Kojima's review that it started to gain more traction, for me at least. And I did watch this per request from viewers, and I thank you for this because it was quite a fun ride. If you're looking for something to scratch your Shogun itch, this might just be it. Blue Eye Samurai takes place in the mid 1600s, about 50 years after Shogun's events. 1633 is the date on the opening exposition, but the plot takes place some years after that. This is the Edo period, where the Tokugawa name would reign over Japan for nearly 300 years. Now, a big thing about Edo was the unification of Japan. Japan had been in constant civil wars and bouts with different region daimyos. The Sengoku period, or the Warring States prior to Edo, was about these major historical figures aiming to be shogun, or a supreme power in Japan. Tokugawa, of course, got the title, and under his name, Japan reached a unification. This meant a lot of changes were going to happen. For one thing, samurai were in a different state now. Before, there was always war, and they were ready to go to war. Samurai were the top dogs, proud warriors. But now, there were no wars to fight. They still had their pride, for sure, and those samurai ideologies would push these characters in the series. Another major thing was Japan was now returning to an isolated state. What does this mean? It means that foreign influence was removed from Japan, and the Japanese themselves were prohibited from exploring foreign lands. The trade was greatly reduced, the Dutch being one of the few that were still allowed to trade with Japan. A major reason for this was Christianity, which since its inception had been an issue for many Japanese leaders. They feared its influence it could have on the Japanese and how it could affect the powers, and in 1614, it was officially banned. Now, many did still practice it in secret. There's actually a pretty good film, I haven't seen it in a few years, but I remember it being pretty good, called Silence, that focuses on this. And that could be an interesting watch to have between Shogun and Blue Eye, honestly, as it focuses on the purge of Christianity. The Scorsese one is the most recent, but it's actually based off of a novel that had a couple adaptations. As I said, only the Dutch were really allowed to trade, but they were limited to Nagasaki, and it wasn't exactly welcoming. So, their numbers dwindled, and eventually kinda just faded out. Now, you know I like to look at the historical accuracy with these types of stories, but I feel we should be a little bit more lenient with Blue Eye because it is a fiction that, to my knowledge, has not preached any claims of being super accurate depiction. Rather, it is just focused on telling its own story, which is great because the story is good. The lead of the series is Mizu, voiced by Maya Erskine, a mixed-race white Japanese woman on a path of revenge. So there's already a lot of elements there. The big one is her being mixed race, which at the time was not very common, nor was it looked upon highly. As the series states, mixed race are seen as impure, and often Mizu is described as a demon for her eyes. We'll get back to the demon thing in a bit. Another is that she is born female, which opens a whole can of worms in Japanese history. It should be noted that Japan was deeply misogynistic and had a very strong patriarchy, but the roles of women were more complex than people actually give them credit for, especially coming off of the Sengoku. There were many great Onimusha, not Onimusha, Onimusha, female warriors and female samurai. But with the reforms in Edo, you didn't see female warriors as much. And during the Edo, samurai in general had less warrior roles and were turning more bureaucratic. Women were expected to be even more subservient. And as the Edo would move further on, more along the years, women would be seen even less, and the idea of being a warrior would be replaced with them being seen as nothing more than child bearers. So female warriors existed, but the role had greatly diminished by this time, and it's pretty evident in how Mizu is considered. For most of the series, Mizu is identified as a male, and social perceptions of Japan at the time, as if not to say still today, were rather extreme, and Mizu goes against the norm or what's expected, and it might actually just be unfathomable to them that a woman could be such a great fighter. From the way she talks, the way she dresses, the way she acts, the way she fights, it all goes against the expectations that were held for women. Mizu, interestingly enough, opposes both misogyny and racial supremacy of Japan. An interesting parallel is Brenda Song's character, Akemi, also known as the Princess. Princess is not really a title here, but I think they use that term to make it easier for Western audiences. Her dad's not necessarily a king or anything, he's a feudal lord. Other than that, her whole story seems pretty realistic. For one thing, she's expected to be subservient to her father's wishes, which is to marry her off to someone of higher power. And who better than the son of the shogun? Everyone thinks that Akemi has it made because of this. She gets the easy life. But does that mean that she is not allowed to pick her own happiness? Which, to her, is to marry Taigen. Why? That I cannot tell you, but we'll get into that guy in a bit. I think more so it's about just having the option to make the choice herself. Akemi's journey of independence is a nice one to follow because she's not a weak character. Questionable, perhaps, but she uses her intelligence to her advantage, and she adapts and uses her assets to survive. She even manages to use her wit to save herself from a not so favorable situation. There are many ways that Akemi could have been handled that would have been so boring or generic, and I was surprised that I actually found myself caring about her story. Again, motives a bit questionable, but it was enough to keep me hooked. Through her story, we get a different insight on the darker aspects of Edo life, but they aren't shown overly negative. They're matter-of-factly. Yes, brothels existed, and there was cruelty, but it was also just work. Through characters like Madame Kaji, voiced by Mulan herself, Min Na Wen, who offer her perspective on how to handle a more independent life. Though I must say that I don't think this show is helping with the confusion of the geisha and courtesans. Geisha are not prostitutes. They are entertainers. This is a major misconception that many still hold. Also, prostitution was not illegal at this time, but it was restricted, and they had to follow specific laws. That's where the yukaku come in. These are essentially brothels. These are government-approved locations where sex work can happen. And here's another history lesson for you. Geisha were predominantly men. It wasn't until the mid-1700s that female geisha became popular. While geisha have been around since this time, the traditional image that you may know doesn't really kick into gear until around the 1800s. Again, this show does a lot to simplify its translation of elements for Western audiences. Being that this is a Western production based in Japanese history, it's still a pretty common misconception that continues to grow. It's not necessarily a complaint, just something I hope gets worked on. Another point of interest for Akemi that really tickled my history bone was the ohaguro. This is the darkening of the teeth. It was a popular fashion move for women and men from the 10th to the 19th century. The blackening of teeth was pretty popular all around Southeast Asia. I feel like ohaguro doesn't really make that many appearances in historical fictions. I understand that it's not very attractive to do, but the history nerd in me appreciates the detail. In the Edo period, women would do this during engagements, but this practice would eventually die out around the Meiji Restoration. Another character to look at is Taigen. He's an asshole. Ringo is my favorite character. He's not incredibly interesting, nor unique, but my god, I love him. The main plot follows as such. Mizu is on a quest for revenge to hunt down the white men who were hanging around Japan, the focus being on Fowler, played by Kenneth Branagh, who, oh my god, is so hilarious in this.
You still alive? Why?
I'm not even sure if it's the intention, maybe because I love Branagh so much. Fowler has connections to the Shogun, who against his own laws is making trade deals. Fowler uses this to build himself up, getting a lot of power in Japan, in hopes of eventually taking over. To get to Fowler, Mizu must hunt down Heiji Shindo, played by Randall Park, who is just Randall Park. Maybe a little bit more nasally, but yeah, it's just him. I do find it funny with the limited Japanese actors in this Japanese story, which accounts for a lot of mispronunciations. Shogun being the big one. I think George Takei is actually the only one who said it right in the show, being one of the few Japanese players in this. I swear at some point someone also said sake instead of sake. This is probably not that big of a deal, but it does kind of stick out, and I'm sure a few other people have probably noticed it as well. Outside of that, I don't really have a problem with the voice acting. I think the cast is pretty damn good, actually. There are a lot of characters that interweave their own stories around Mizu's quest for retribution, and it's never distracting. They all complement each other quite well and eventually tie in nicely. I guess I do have to mention Taigen in more detail. He's an asshole who has a history with Mizu. He wants to marry Akemi for status, but he loses a duel to Mizu and becomes obsessed with reclaiming his honor. He essentially is the essence of prolonging certain samurai ideologies. In a sense, he is a vessel of keeping the samurai spirit alive, the old samurai spirit. Mizu is even willing to do so only after she finishes her quest, which leads Taigen to reluctantly helping her out. He's also trying really hard to do a Zuko impression.
Why didn't he just kill me?
Blue Eye is not technically an anime, not in the same vein as being a Japanese production. The animation was actually heralded by Blue House, a French studio. The series was created by husband and wife duo Amber Noizumi and Michael Green, while being directed by Jane Wu, a martial artist. While not anime in traditional sense, it does a damn good job at building the aesthetic of Edo Japan. I cannot express this enough. The animation is phenomenal. I was so hooked at nearly every frame from just the first episode alone. I wanted to pause and soak in every detail. It was immaculate. Near every frame is wallpaper worthy. The animation is incredible. From still moments of characters exchanging dialogue to the high adrenaline action scenes. The cinematography perfectly matches the tight choreography to make us feel a part of the action. This is the type of action I've been desperately needing in modern media. I mean desperately. That said, don't expect realistic fighting. Expect all the excitement that animation can offer in a way that still feels somehow grounded. The way that the show can effortlessly weave in different styles. Oh, I'm not a huge fan of 3D CG animation, but this is how you do it. It mixes 2D and 3D styles. This animation breathes so much more life into this visual spectacle than many recent live-action stories I've seen. In general, I think that the animation is able to bring to life this historical time period in ways that have been attempted before and just don't quite come close to the same impact. Jane Wu, the director, went the extra mile to make sure that the animators knew what they were handling and how to make it feel as tangible as possible. Her history as a martial artist also adds those little textures to the direction of the fight scenes that make them stand out so well. The expressions of the characters also bring to life a new level of realism to this, which is so beneficial for pulling your viewers into this story. This show is primarily aimed at adults, as it is an adult series, and it seems that for some reason there are adults that still struggle with the concept that anyone can watch animation. People still confuse the term cartoon with animation, I guess. There's also a lot of dicks and tits. If you're prudish to nudity, I gotta warn you, there's a lot. All of those nice things out the way, expect some clunky writing. Sometimes it's just very anime. And sometimes it's really good. Sometimes it's not. Not at all.
You won't go anywhere except in the funeral cart.
It's not overly jarring or distracting. In fact, I don't really think it damages the series, but actually adds to the charm of it. I once read a review that described it as Mulan meets Kill Bill, and I 1000% agree with the Kill Bill part. Mulan, I guess, shares the themes of a female oppressed under male expectations from Asian culture and overcomes them by being a warrior. Saying this as a mega fan of Mulan, I don't really compare them much more than that. The Kill Bill rings so true in moments of its writing, narrative, action, cinematography, and of course, battle without honor and humanity. I love this song. I love it to death. But I cringed so bad when I heard it on here. It threw me off because this is your first instance of hearing a actual song that wasn't just part of the score thrown into the show. The score itself is very good. It feels like it's a part of the story. It's not overbearing. It perfectly balances with the visuals. And then fucking For Whom the Bell Tolls plays. Those things take me out a little bit, but they do add to the fun and the fact that this is an animation and it's a fiction. This is not some historical retelling of events. It's a fun story. Well, it's a bit depressing, but it's fun to watch. The first episode shows a meteorite falling right next to Mizu, which just so happens to connect her and put her under the care of Zatoichi. It doesn't have to be realistic to be a good story. It's so good, in fact, that I'm insulted that I have to see the Netflix logo at the beginning of every episode. That is a huge reason that delayed me from viewing the series. Episode 5 by far was my favorite, and I think it was for many other viewers. It manages to tell 3 different stories that are all connected to Mizu. We have the continuing present that picks up from the previous episode, a deeply investing flashback that gives us so much of Mizu that it is perhaps the most important flashback for her, and the telling of the Onryo story. Onryo is of course the famous ghost featured in many different stories, the most famous being the tale of Oiwa, which I did feel some similarities to in this tale. Onryo of course are the typical demonic spirits of women who have been wronged by men. The chosen tale does more than enough to let the viewer know the type of story associated with Onryo and their concept for anyone unfamiliar or familiar with. Throughout the series, Mizu is compared to a demon, from the prejudice that the pure Japanese hold on to her. In the first episode, that's almost how the show wants us to see her. Mizu kills a lot without remorse, fueled by her own ambition with little regard for her environment. They aren't evil by any means, but they aren't very good either. But to recall a quote from Phantom of the Opera, "If I am a phantom, it is because man's hatred made me so." Mizu is not a demon, but will play the role of one because that is how society built them to be. But we, the audience, know that she isn't one. She is a human being suffering from her trauma. Her entire life was filled with trauma. Mizu is a compelling character, one that defies certain issues that have been going around with female leads. I've said that the writing in Blue Eye isn't spectacular, mostly that it falls under anime-esque tropes. It never felt pandering. Mizu feels genuine, except for their heavy plot armor. But I give it a pass, because my god, the fighting is so good in this. It's her flashback in the episode that also illustrates why she's such a compelling character, and not just another busted lone wolf character stereotype. A relationship maturing throughout the seasons, a brief happiness, finally letting their guard down, only for a harsh, cruel reminder. I would love to return to this episode for a deeper analysis in the future. One of the major concerns that I was dreading on my watch was that I heard many were not happy with the season finale. Season, as it does not conclude the story. I believe a second season is in development, but Netflix has a very sketchy track record. It's definitely completely fallen off the rails of any historical accuracy by this point, sure, but I didn't find it offensive at all. In fact, I'm actually excited for season 2. There are a lot of loose ends that it could have gave us a little bit more to work with. I would have been happy if the last episode could have been just a little bit longer, 10, 15 minutes longer. Yeah, but it actually set up pretty nicely a continuation for the story. Wonders of how they'll play in this new setting. I don't want to spoil too much, but it feels as though we're moving through the opening stages of these characters' lives, and that there is so much more of their story to unfold, especially for Akemi and Taigen. Even with its flaws, Blue Eye is one of the most interesting series I've seen in a while. I was sluggish to watch it, and that was my mistake. It seems, as usual, Netflix is not doing a good enough job to market this, because even when they released that free episode, it seemed that they just stopped promoting it after a few weeks. I can't even open social media without a damn ad or promotion for Shogun shoved down my throat every 5 seconds. And that social media campaign is part of what helped get that show any sort of attention. And it's a shame that Netflix puts more effort in their mediocre shows rather than the ones that are actually worth the time. I am sincerely grateful to those who suggested this series to me. I don't say this often. I am waiting for the next season. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a very, very strong desire to rewatch Lady Snowblood. As always, thank you for watching. If you have any more suggestions, leave them in the comments below. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and if you haven't already, please subscribe as it helps the channel a lot. And I'll see you all next time.